very good morning to you all. Welcome to this session looking at the approach that we take at OSCR to dealing with concerns about charities and some recent changes that we've made in this area. I'm Laura Anderson, as the slide will give away, and I'm going to share this session with my colleague Kenny Mathers. I'm going to start us off by talking just a little bit, if I can get the slides to work here. Good stuff. Setting out just a little bit of context for us to start off with, which I think should be helpful when we get more into the kind of nuts and bolts of what we do and why we do it. I'm also going to talk a little bit about what our experience had been like prior to some improvements that we made earlier this year when we obviously introduced the new inquiry policy. And then Kenny's going to come up and talk a little bit more about the changes that we made and about how that's going so far. I'm going to come back then and round off with some kind of practical insights into the approach that we take when we're dealing with inquiries on a day-to-day basis. Now, just to kind of demystify, when we talk about dealing with inquiries, that's what we call the work when we carry out investigations, if you like, into concerns that have come to us about charities. It's the language that's used in charity law to describe the powers that we have to investigate a charity, so it's the language that we tend to therefore use. So, let's have a bit of a look at this context. So, the key point that I really like to stress from the outset is that when we're talking about the part of OSCR's work that involves dealing with concerns, we are talking about really quite small numbers and very, very small proportions of the overall charity sector in Scotland. So the number of charities that we have in Scotland is somewhere in the region of 25,000. Now, I say somewhere in the region, it's not because I don't know how to do my job, but I don't know how many charities there are on the register, but it's because that number changes every day. As those of you that are familiar with the Scottish Charity Register will know, every day when you go onto OSCR's website, when you open up the home page, that number of charities on the register is going to look probably different every day. So far in this business year, and I'm going to talk about figures in terms of business years here. This business year, so that's since the 1st of April for us, we've received 196 concerns about charities from external sources. Now, mainly they come from members of the public. Last year, we received 638 concerns in total. Now, I don't want anyone to be confused with the figures that Maureen referred to earlier when she talked about in the region of 400 concerns. That was a calendar year Maureen was talking about. These are business years, so that's running from the 1st of April to the 31st of March. So, as a result of assessing the concerns that we've received, we've so far this year opened 74 inquiry cases into charities. So, you'll now be wondering, what happened to the rest, Laura? So, what happened to the rest of the concerns where we didn't open an inquiry? I'm going to explain about that just in a wee moment. But already, hopefully, you're starting to get a clearer picture that the number of charities that we receive concerns about is a very, very small proportion of the overall number in Scotland, okay? So that's an immense relief for us all, I'm sure. But let's try and take a few minutes to try and really understand what's actually going on here. So, as I said, we've received 196 concerns since the start of April this year about charities. So what does that actually mean? Does it mean that we've got 196 charities where there's something really seriously wrong, like money's gone missing? No, absolutely not. Does it mean there are 196 instances of the same wrong thing happening in 196 charities? No, absolutely not at all. In fact, far from it. Now, one of the things, and this very much correlates with what Maureen was talking about earlier, one of the things I love about working with charities is that every single one is different, and you will all know that from your experience every day. The sheer diversity in terms of the people, the activities, the beneficiaries, and the ways of working, every single one is different. Even two scout groups that you might think are relatively similar, they'll still be quite different because there are different people involved. As a charity regulator, that diversity also brings us some challenges, however, and you might very well expect that. But in the context of what we're talking about here, it means that the concerns that we receive about charities are immensely varied. You know, some really weird and wonderful things come across our desks, things that might make your hair stand on end occasionally. But that means that for us, we need to be very, very clear about what our role as a charity regulator really is, so that concerns that people have can be dealt with in the quickest and the best way possible. So that brings us on to talking about the inquiry policy and the changes that we made back in June. So let's take a look. Now, we've had a published policy about how we deal with concerns about charities and inquiries ever since I can remember, and I came to OSCR some 16 years ago now. But over time, awareness of OSCR and very much, I would say, has grown amongst the public in Scotland. And as more people engage with charities as potential users of their services, perhaps as donors and perhaps as volunteers, so has the number of concerns that we receive about charities also gone up. But not everything, of course, that somebody might actually be concerned about is necessarily for us as a charity regulator to deal with. There are a broad range of routes that can be much more appropriate than coming to OSCR. And that was actually becoming a very, very significant feature of what we were actually receiving in terms of concerns almost day in, day out. So let me illustrate this with some numbers. So we've already said 638 concerns were received by us in the last business year. So that's from the 1st of April 2022, the 31st of March 2023. 563 as a comparison in that prior business year. So of those total numbers, would you like to have a guess maybe at how many of these concerns were really relevant for us to deal with as a charity regulator? So would you think it was maybe in the region of 80 to 100%? Maybe 60 to 80? Would it be less than that? Now you're all thinking, now what's it going to be? Is it going to be the one in the middle? You know those quiz shows on the television when you're always told it's never the answer in the middle? Okay, you're probably higher, lower? What would it be? The answer is that bottom category. In actual fact, the answer was actually 41%. So we were getting an awful lot of concerns coming through the door that actually we were not the best place to kind of deal with that. And we were really keen to try and actually understand what was really going on here, because the number of concerns in total had been increasing in recent years, but so had the proportions where we weren't the best people to deal with those issues. We also looked at the experience of our charity regulator colleagues in England and Wales to understand if their experience was perhaps similar to ours, and indeed there were some similarities. And that really supported the need for us to think very, very long and hard about how things could be improved and what was really prompting the behaviour that we were actually seeing. We started to ponder questions like this. Was it because there were an awful lot of grumpy people in Scotland who wanted to raise concerns? Was it that we had a lot of bad people doing bad things? Or actually, we were having an awful lot of frustrated people trying to scream down a telephone? What was really going on here? We started to think that actually perhaps the issue was really with understanding, and that was something that was potentially within our gift to really help with. So this is the moment at which we put our best brains in gear. We sharpened our pencils. I don't know about anybody here, but I think best with a pencil and a good blank sheet of paper. Does anybody else identify with that? So best brains in gear, sharpened the pencils, and we set to work. And this is where I'm going to hand over to Kenny, who's going to talk to you about what we did next.
Thank you, Laura. So what did we do? What did we find and what did we do? We looked at what people were expressing concerns about to OSCR and how they did that. And we identified a number of potential issues that were not helping anybody, we felt. It would help if we're going to the right slide, actually. There we go. The first thing that we found was there was a lack of clarity about what charity trustees are responsible for. Charity trustees are, by definition, those people who are in the management and control of a charity. And as such, they are responsible for how the charity is run and what it does. Many of the concerns that were being expressed to us were about issues that the charity trustees should deal with, such as unhappiness or dissatisfaction with the services that the charity was delivering, or about matters relating to employment of staff, or queries about decisions that the charity trustees had taken that other people did not necessarily agree with. We also felt there was a misunderstanding of what OSCR's role was as a charity regulator. Our role at the purest level is set out in charity law in Scotland, our functions, that is. The most relevant one for concerns received about charities is the identification and investigation of apparent misconduct in the administration of charities and taking remedial or protective action in relation to such misconduct. That was a mouthful, that one. Our functions do not, however, include a role as a mediator in disputes or a power of veto in relation to decisions that have been taken validly by charity trustees. However, it appeared that many people bringing concerns to OSCR felt that that was what we were there to do. It's also really important to say that we act, or we should be acting, when it's in the public interest to do so. The vast majority of concerns we were receiving were from people who wanted us to resolve a personal issue that they had with a charity. What do I mean by that? Typically, we would receive concerns, an awful lot of concerns from people who had perhaps lost their job with a charity, people who had fallen out with a charity, very common for ex-trustees, for example, to raise concerns with us. We often got a lot of concerns also from people who didn't like or agree with what a charity is doing. That's really, really common in sort of community bodies where not all the decisions taken are necessarily popular. More specifically, the types of concerns that we were receiving, and these are examples of things that we would get day in, day out, and these are real examples we've had recently where somebody raised the concern that they had got a cat from a charity that rehomed cats, and they were told it was 5 years old, only to find out it was actually 12, so they wanted OSCR to get them a refund. Another example, a real one we had recently, that was where somebody had complained that a charity had liked a tweet by Greta Thunberg, and that liking a tweet was in fact an endorsement of a political movement, and that the charity shouldn't be doing that. And we also had somebody very recently, just the other week, who had started work with a charity and had been given a work mobile phone, but they felt their phone wasn't as good as the other people that worked there, and therefore OSCR should be investigating that. These are genuinely not isolated examples. These are the types of things that we were getting every day. We also felt there was a lack of understanding that there are different regulators that do different things. We often talk about the fact that OSCR is a charity regulator, but that doesn't mean that we regulate every single thing that charities do or are involved in. So for example, there are other regulators out there who deal with health and safety issues, matters that relate to standards of care by registered service providers, and issues relating to tax, to name but a few. We do acknowledge, however, that some of these other regulators are better known than others, but we felt that there seemed to be a belief that OSCR would deal with absolutely everything as long as the organisation happened to be a charity. The other thing that we felt that was misunderstood was our need for clarity and evidence. Regularly, we will receive emails saying, I've got a hunch about this charity. I'm sure they're up to no good. Can't put my finger on it, but if you have a look, I'm sure you'll uncover loads of bad stuff. That's the sort of thing we would regularly get. We had one again I think it was this week actually, where somebody said, you won't be disappointed. They actually said to us, no evidence whatsoever, but we would not be disappointed. That's actually what they said. When we receive a concern about a charity, as mentioned earlier, we carry out what's called a risk assessment. It allows us to consider the information in the concern alongside any other relevant information that we have about the charity in question. And it also allows us to make a judgment about the severity of the seriousness of the issues. As the name suggests, we're assessing risk. Risk in this context has a number of facets, such as risk to the charity and its assets, including its reputation, risk to the people that the charity provides benefit to, and risk to public trust in charities. In order to properly risk assess a concern, it's helpful that we have a good description of what the concern is, any processes that have already been completed, such as raising a complaint with the charity trustees, and any supporting evidence. It might also be helpful to say at this stage something about what people could do before now to raise concerns with OSCR. We did have a concerns form, we've always had a concerns form, but it was extremely basic and it was really difficult to upload attachments. People were forever saying it didn't work. But we didn't even insist people use the concerns form, and the consequence of that was that an awful lot of people would simply email OSCR, and these types of concerns typically contained even less detail than what was contained in the previous concerns form. So we literally got to a position where the sheer volume of concerns that we were receiving, combined with the fact that the overwhelming majority of them were either about issues that OSCR couldn't or shouldn't deal with at all, or were about fairly insignificant issues, led us to believe that we had to do something. So, what did we do? Well, what we did is we introduced a new improved inquiry policy and concerns form. By understanding more clearly what the issues were that were contributing to what we were receiving and experiencing, we've been able to make changes that are already leading to some improvements. Firstly, we reflected on how we were communicating about our role and our work in this area and what we could do to make it easier for people to understand how best to deal with their concerns. recognising that OSCR is not always the right organisation to deal with. It became really obvious to us that if we were having to write to people every day to explain that they should address their concerns to somebody else, surely we should try and make that clearer to people so they don't come to us in the first instance. So that's one of the things we've tried to be really clear about in the new policy. And in tandem with this, the new inquiry policy, we've redesigned the online concerns forum that should be used to raise concerns with OSCR. And when we did this, we looked at what a range of other regulators do, not just in the UK, but also internationally, where the regulators deal with complaints and concerns. Both of these were introduced on the 1st of June, so we're still early days here, but the signs are definitely encouraging so far. Looking at what the main changes are, in terms of the policy, we think there's more clarity about what the role of charity trustees is and what they should deal with. The forum now specifically asks if the issue has been raised with the trustees, and if not, why not? The reason we've done that is because in most cases the trustees should be given the opportunity to resolve issues before the regulator gets involved. The policy also includes some examples of other regulators that we feel would be relevant based on the types of concerns that we've been receiving. So, for example, there are signposts to the Care Inspectorate, to HMRC and the Scottish Housing Regulator. We also give more clarity about issues that we feel are not for OSCR to deal with, for example, employment matters and contractual disputes. And we try and give more clarity about what OSCR may investigate. And I say may because, as a risk-based regulator, which we've spoken about a lot so far, we potentially could deem it not appropriate to take action in every single case, depending on the risk of the issues that are brought to our attention. We've also changed quite a lot about what to expect if you raise a concern with OSCR. This is now very different, as once a concern has been received, we deal with it as we deem necessary and appropriate, and we will not necessarily have ongoing communication with the person raising the concern. The reason for that is because we had experienced some significant challenges with the expectations that some people had of what we would do and what information we would share with them at the conclusion of our inquiry. And this was not enabling us to make the choices that are necessary about risk, priority and proportionality. Much of this ties in with what I said earlier about many of the concerns that we receive, not necessarily being in the public interest. It's more where people want us to resolve their personal gripes or issues with a charity. We've also found that an awful lot of people who raised concerns with us have got unrealistic expectations in terms of what actions they think we should be taking. Quite often people would not only raise concerns with us, but actually suggest what they think we should do about it. And most often they would be suggesting things like we should be removing or suspending trustees left, right and centre, or stripping organisations of their charitable status. The bottom line, however, is that we would only take that type of action in the most serious cases. Therefore, what would frequently happen is that the person that raised the concerns would be unhappy with the action that we decided to take, which is more often around supporting, educating and encouraging trustees to better manage their charities. And this would often result in the person that raised the concern not accepting the outcome of the inquiry and continuing to correspond with us because the action we had taken was not what they wanted us to do. Overall, we hope that you appreciate and understand that OSCR as an organisation with under 50 staff and 25,000 charities to regulate can't necessarily look into every issue in microscopic detail, and we should not act in a heavy-handed way unless absolutely necessary. However, where issues are close to people's heart or have an ongoing impact in their day-to-day lives, we do understand that the expectations of people that raise concerns can be quite different from what actually happens in reality. In terms of the new forum, the new online concerns forum, we ask for greater detail to support OSCR's understanding of the issues of concern. Also, depending how people answer certain questions, there is branching built into the new forum so that we can ask for more details about specific things depending on how people answer particular questions. There is now the ability to attach various types of documents as supporting evidence, and there are also intelligent responses to how questions are answered so that if the matter isn't for OSCR to deal with, the person that completes the form should be informed of this at the time, and they should also be notified who they should go to if at all possible. The results so far, well, the first thing to say is that there has been a reduction of more than 50% in the total number of concerns received since the forum came into being. It's only come in on the 1st of June. That was initially a little bit worrying for us because we've been so used to getting so many for so long. During the first 5 months of this year, up until the new form came in, we were averaging 68 concerns received every month. Now, I think Laura mentioned the Charity Commission earlier on. We spoke to them about what their experience is. Despite them having nearly 7 times as many charities as OSCR have to regulate, we were receiving nearly 50% of the concerns that they receive. So there is perhaps an argument there that we were getting too many in the first place. Proportionately, if we receive the same level of concerns as they get, we should be receiving around 22 to 23 a month, whereas we were getting 68. Since the new form was introduced, the numbers are down to round about 30, which feels a lot better in comparison to them. But I think the main thing is not the numbers that we receive. We were more concerned about the number of not appropriate concerns that we were receiving, the ones that weren't for OSCR. So the outcomes so far with that, we've gone from having received 49 concerns that were not for OSCR in May, which was the month before the new policy and form were launched, to 13 in July. So yes, the overall numbers are down, but that's not really what the driver was, as we don't want to not to receive concerns about issues that we should be looking at. What's more important though is that the proportion of concerns that are not things OSCR can or should deal with has gone significantly down so far.